Hello and welcome to the Entrepreneur's Inner Game podcast. I'm so pleased to invite a very special guest today. Her name is Michele Pariza Wacek, and she is the best-selling author of the love-based copywriting books that teach people how to write copy that attracts, inspires, and invites. And she's also the owner of the Creative Concepts and Copywriting LLC, which is a premier direct response copywriting and marketing agency through which she guides entrepreneurs in attracting more clients and boosting their business and income. Michele, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited to be here myself.
And I've been reading your emails for many years, and I love the way that you write.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
And would you just share with our audience who may not know your history, how you come to be doing what you're doing now?
So I actually I've actually been a direct response copywriter. Well, okay, so to back it up a little bit, when I was 3 years old, I taught myself to read because I wanted to write stories so badly, and and so writing was really a driving force throughout my entire life. And so when I was in high school, I was thinking, I was casting around for something to do while I got my books, done. And everybody told me to be a journalist. And I was like, oh, I didn't want to be a journalist. So it wasn't until later in my 20s that I kind of stumbled across this whole wacky world of direct response copywriting. Well, it was actually copywriting. And then I narrowed it into direct response, because copywriting is really anything that businesses need written. So there's quite a lot of stuff that businesses need written. There's actually a whole sort of cottage industry around freelance copywriters, because a lot of businesses, they need things written, but not enough really to keep like a full-time writer. So there's a lot of freelancing that happens, or there might be enough for one full-time writer, but then there's overflow of work, that kind of thing. So I started my business in 1998 as a kind of a freelance copywriter, and and then the internet the internet started to take off, and then obviously that added even more opportunity to this whole thing. And what I ended up doing was kind of transitioning from a freelance copywriter into the owner of a copywriting and marketing company. So, which obviously took a lot of interesting mindset as well doing that.
And that's what you're doing today.
Yes. So I'm doing that as well as writing my books. So it took a while to kind of get all that. And if you're wondering about the love-based piece of it, it was because when I was I learned traditional direct response copy, which is really about getting people, it's like your ideal prospects are directly responding to the copy. That's what that means. And what you see are like emails that tell you to click on a link, or you go to an opt-in page and you have to opt in. Or you're going to a sales letter and you're scrolling down forever going, how much is this thing? And does anybody read this anyways? And that's, so all of that is direct response. It's considered direct response because there's usually a strong call to action at the end, and you have to take action in order to keep going with it. So what happened is I had a lot of friends who were, so they didn't like traditional direct response copy, and you might agree with that, because a lot of it does sound sort of inauthentic and salesy and hypey and arm twisty. And I had a lot of my friends who didn't want to use it, and they would tell me things like, can you come up with another way of writing copy? And they gave me names like attraction copywriting, conscious copywriting, but it didn't, my first thought was absolutely not. There's plenty of copywriting books out there. I don't need to add to it. But eventually in 2014, my friend Susan Liddy actually came out with the book Love-Based Marketing, and I looked at the title and I thought, love-based copy. And I thought, well, what's the difference? What's the flip of love-based copy? Well, that would be fear-based copy. And that was when the whole philosophy downloaded into me. And the deeper I got with it, the reason why I have like love-based business now, and I have a whole bunch of books, including love-based money and mindset, is because I realize how much of, you could either, how much fear and love, all those emotions really impact every single aspect of our life, because all emotions are fit under either fear or love. And fear, obviously, well, love, you can, happiness, joy, all the stuff we want to feel. Fear-based emotions are things like grief, anger, worry, anxiety, envy, jealousy, all of that, shame, guilt. That's all under fear-based emotions. And the problem is that we don't want to feel fear-based emotions because they don't feel very good, do they? So, and our culture doesn't want to feel fear-based emotions. So we've kind of created this dynamic where we are constantly pushing away those feelings. And the problem with pushing away feelings is feelings just don't go away because we don't feel like feeling them. Feelings, they still stick around. And what they do is we, when you think about all the things that we do in our life to keep us from feeling things, like for instance, there's the obvious ones, like when we have a bad day, we go home and maybe have a drink, or, get out the Rocky Road ice cream. We might go shopping, but then there's also things like, we can start fights because we're relieving the tension in us, gossiping, ranting on Facebook, creating drama. There's a lot of ways that we use, and even worrying, this constant, like, sort of like future spinning that goes on in your head. All of this is really tied into us, it's like behaviors that we're taking because we don't want to feel our emotions. If we just stopped and felt them and let them move through us, and granted, it's not easy. I mean, it's simple, but it's not easy. And it certainly doesn't feel very good. But if we don't allow those emotions to move through us, they will control us because we're so busy creating our lives and taking action. So to distract ourselves from feeling them, I mean, procrastination is part of it, getting sucked into hours and hours of Netflix, watching TV, watching videos on cat videos on YouTube, all of those behaviors that we do is part of our kind of like escaping or distracting or numbing or running away from those emotions. And when we run away from them, like I said, they don't go away. And so we're actually building our businesses, our lives, everything on this sort of foundation of fear.
So how did you create the mindset to grow your business? To have because you started off where we all start off when we start our business, and many business owners stay, fairly stuck, and they don't manage to fulfill their potential or grow the business that they dreamt of. What made you decide to, really create that success? What was your thinking? And did you stumble? What things that held you back? How did you overcome them? Lots of questions tied up in one big question there.
Yeah, no, I definitely stumbled a lot. So part of the reason why I like to go on here and talk about this stuff is that there was a time where I was like you, and I was thinking that I was like a hot mess and everybody else around me had it together and I didn't. And the reality of the situation is we're all hot messes. Because I've worked with a lot of very, very successful entrepreneurs. And, in a lot of ways, they doubt themselves, they experience failure, they fall on their faces too. So, they're really no different. So what happened with me, so I think one of the things that ends up happening is what finally happens is our desire to grow or actually have the dream, realize the dream that's in our head becomes stronger than the fear that stops us. And there is like a saying about that. It's something like, it's like the desire to bloom was bigger than the fear to stay a bud or something like that. I think Rumi said it. It was far more poetic than I just butchered.
Well, the desire for gain is greater than the pain.
Yeah. And, there comes a time in every business entrepreneur where that really ends up happening. And usually it happens after you try to grow without, by avoiding the fear, quite honestly. So usually what's happening is that you're kind of like you're skirting around the edges, and you're doing the right thing, but you haven't really stepped into it. And by stepping into it, I mean really facing your fears, feeling them, and walking through them, because things are going to happen. Emotions are going to come up as you take action. Because that's how it looks. So it's like, let's say you decide, you want to grow your business, and maybe you're going to have a big launch, of a new product. So as you start creating the marketing materials and creating the product for a launch, you're going to have fear and doubt, maybe overwhelm, maybe procrastination, maybe a lack of focus. And you have a choice. You can either keep going through those emotions, or you can stop and decide, oh, I've got all this other stuff to do. I'll push the launch back, 6 months, next year, whatever. And that's always, and that's an obvious one, but that's always the decisions that we're making in the moment. And I saw this so much with me, is that when I was doing, I always got client work done. That was always a non-negotiable. But in terms of getting stuff done for my own business, whether it was marketing, whether it was writing my books, whether it was doing, it took me a long time. I finally have a few more products out there, but I really didn't launch very many products, because what would happen with me is that was precisely it. I would say okay, I'm going to launch a product, and then I would start to feel overwhelmed, and then I would decide that rather than push myself because, I had all this other stuff to do, I would just not do it. And I don't think I did myself any favors, quite honestly, thinking back on it. I allowed myself to shrink back. I allowed myself to not move forward. And when I made the transition from being a freelance copywriter to business owner, I had a lot of that doubts and, worries like, oh my God, because what I was doing was very different. And most people, when they hire a copywriter, kind of the norm was, you're talking, you call the person up, you find a freelance copywriter, you talk to them, and then you hire them. There was no hiring somebody and then they have a team of copywriters, which is what I have now. That was never really, in a part of the, that wasn't the model. So I had a lot of fear, like people weren't going to hire me. And then there were some people who didn't, because I wasn't confidently talking about it. Once I started confidently talking about it, that really went away. And I found the smarter people, the smarter entrepreneurs were actually happy I had a team, because then they knew that they were going to be getting taken care of without them, because the reality is freelance copywriters, you're dealing with one person, and biggest strengths is biggest weakness. There's problems with that. They get sick, they get overwhelmed, and then what do? They can't finish the work, and then you're stuck. So, I was able to start really kind of standing in that and being really strong about the strengths of what I brought. I also have an editor, I have good quality control, so there's actually things that I've been able to put into it that really fix sort of the weaknesses of the freelance model. So and then when people kind of, when they realized that, they kind of the clients lost this idea that they had to talk to the writer, because that seemed to be a, kind of a weird thing. But so that's what happens, and that's what stops you. It's like when you're getting ready to do something, and maybe you suddenly you have this you're ready to work on the product that you're going to work on, and then you suddenly realize you have to go and do the laundry. That's an obvious one, or that's not an obvious one, but it's what I'm trying to say is there's a lot of different ways that this shows up. Yes. And that's what you have to be aware of so you can keep moving through it.
And you said that you went from not feeling confident about explaining your setup to clients to becoming confident in explaining your setup. How did you get that confidence? What happened there?
Well, I think again, a lot of it was done through just I knew I had to get to a point because I was feeling so unsure, and I was very lucky too. My husband's a part of the business. He's like the COO, and so he's part of it as well. And so he really, he was able to see these flaws, and so he kept pushing me too. And again, the desire to have this business the way it was finally outweighed my my worries and my concerns about it. So then I finally was able to, and then once I started doing it and I got better feedback, I was able to keep doing it. So sometimes it's just a matter of getting started and getting some positive feedback back. But, again, when I look back on all the turning points, it really became, it was the pay is like when what really finally ended up happening was I realized that in order for me to get, XYZ, wherever I wanted to go, I had to, it's like, I knew that this was, I knew that, I knew that here, there was this, emotions in front of me, fear or whatever. But the idea of just constantly, just always not getting what I wanted was finally just too unbearable. And that's, even though I might fail, even though it might not work out the way I wanted, I had to still start taking steps in action towards it. So I don't know how you can circumvent that. I mean, maybe because I'm trying to do that now, quite honestly, because now I've done this enough. So what I'm trying to do now is when I start to see, me wanting to shrink back or wanting me to do something, I immediately correct it. So I'm sort of deliberately doing that a little more consciously now versus just because before it was very unconscious. It was just like, it finally got to the point where I just couldn't stand it anymore. And then I would move forward. And now I'm trying to be more conscious so I can keep moving forward in in a better way.
Yes, I love that because also you talked about positive feedback when you were getting positive feedback from your clients.
Yes.
And you were collecting evidence, weren't you, that actually what
Yes.
you were doing was working. And then when you get that evidence, then that helps you to start being able to take more risks and moving out of your comfort zone even more.
Exactly. So sometimes I think it's just a matter of taking some baby steps. Now, I will say too, I definitely got good feedback, but I also got bad feedback too. So the thing is that it's really easy. I remember, in fact, I remember one person in particular, she, came to, it was interesting because she came to us and and she, was talking to, I had a salesperson, she's talking to the salesperson, and the salesperson, she basically was, I think she might even, I don't know, she actually signed the contract, but everything was basically ready to go. And then she said, okay, so when do I get to talk to Michelle? And my salesperson said, you don't. She went through all that. And then she just freaked out. She flipped out. And this was going to be a decent sized contract. And no, I can't possibly, I got to talk to her. And so the whole thing just and this was near the beginning when I was doing this. So this could have been something, I could have used that as evidence that it didn't work. But at that point, I was getting to the point where, again, the pain of not doing this was, and I thought to myself, you know what, I don't want to be defined by that. I mean, it's like, because I remember thinking to myself, I could make an exception, because then you always face that. Do you make an exception and work with it? And I thought, no, I have to be, this is going to keep coming up. I'm going to keep having people do this to me unless I finally take a stand. And actually, so that was actually one of the turning points where I really just decided, okay, what if I started setting things up in the pre, like if I, did some videos and started being more confident talking about it. So it was, instead of just kind of dancing around it. So that way, when the salesperson had a prospect, it wasn't such a surprise and a shock to them. So I just wanted to say that too, because I think, we need to collect the positive evidence, and that'll definitely come. But sometimes we have to, we have to see what the negative is, and the negative evidence isn't necessarily telling us what we think it is, or our fears are telling us, which is this isn't working. And like in that particular story, really what I think that story was showing me was that I wasn't showing up. So I was putting it all on the salesperson to explain. And since I hadn't set the table properly when they came in, I was the reason why she was failing. So I think that's the other thing too, is that the failures and bad stories isn't necessarily telling you what you're doing is a bad idea or not what you're supposed to be doing.
Yes, I completely agree. I like to call failings, mistakes, failures, learnings, because out of everything you can learn something.
Exactly.
Brilliant. And you said that now you're aware, you self-correct before you get to that really painful place, then you can take action to stop yourself, you can change track, as it were.
Right.
And the awareness is so important, isn't it? When we become aware of our thinking, and then we might be going down the path of self-sabotage again, to be able to correct that is fantastic.
Well, and part of it is because I've become so more comfortable with the fear-based emotions. And I mean, and I'm not going to say this is not easy. It's simple, but not easy. And in fact, I just had, a bout with some of this. But the thing is that if you're willing to sit in your fear-based emotions, if you're willing to sit in the anger and the grief, the shame, the guilt, the worry, without judging, without shaming yourself, without trying to, distract yourself from feeling it or numb yourself or hide from it. If you just sit and feel it, eventually what will happen is those emotions, while I'm not going to say that they're pleasant, because they're never going to be pleasant. I mean, they feel the way they feel, but and that doesn't change. But what changes is that your relationship with them, because you stop being afraid of feeling them. You stop being terrified of just going there, because you realize that. So when they lose that power over you, what happens is that you can finally, like where I'm at now, one of the things that I used to struggle with so much was I could never figure out what my inner voice was, or my intuition, versus the fear-based emotions. I could never tell a difference. And so I was constantly second guessing myself and judging myself, because I couldn't really hear. But now, because there are times where you're not supposed to do something. And then there are times where your emotions are telling you not to do something, but you actually are supposed to do something. So then, how do you sort these two things out? Well, once you start getting more comfortable with your emotions, you start, now I can see, now I can feel like, okay, this is just the ego or the fear-based emotions or whatever. That's, and these are emotions that I don't want to say they're lying to you, but they are. It's like the message, they're just emotions. They're just feelings. Those are the emotions that shouldn't be controlling my action. And then underneath that is I can hear, I can recognize the difference with the inner voice and their wisdom, because it feels differently. So that's one of the things that you can do. So it's not even just your thinking, it's also the emotions. Like, now when I recognize, when I feel things come up, I don't immediately go running off, scurrying off to do something. I can pause and feel it and respond to what's happening. And I think that's really the key. And when you're responding, then it's easier to be aware of, okay, so, this emotion is coming up and I really want to, I'm feeling very overwhelmed, and I'm feeling like maybe I should, not do X, Y, Z. And then I can say, is that true? Because I'm recognizing, so is that true, or is that just, my old way of doing it that's coming up and I need to move through it? And so that's why becoming more of a master of your emotions is so key.
Yes, I love that. I really love that. I think that's fantastic advice. I'd love to talk to you a little bit about copywriting, because every business owner writes copy to some extent. And some people love writing copy. Some people are like, not bothered, it's okay. And some people really hate writing copy. And yet we know that when we could put our own voice into our copy, then that's what really speaks to the readers.
Yeah.
So could you pass on any gold dust information, advice to our audience about how they can sit down and write decent copy that reflects who they are? And I know that's a really big question to answer in the short amount of time we have, but any gems you could pass on would be really helpful.
So one easy way would be to make sure that you have figured out who your ideal clients are. And your ideal clients are people you love to work with, and they love you back. Especially if you're a coach. If you're not a coach, if you're just, if you have like a retail store and people are kind of coming in and out, I don't know if it's necessarily quite as important because you're not spending a lot of time one-on-one with them. But, I think that, but as much as possible, I think, enjoying your clients is a good thing. Even if you do have a retail store, because if you don't enjoy your clients, then do you really want to be in a position where you're dreading coming into work? You're dreading when the phone rings. You're dreading to talk to them. I mean, so if you love your clients and they love you back, then right there, that's easier for you to market because you really do, you really truly, want more. You want to attract more. Whereas if you don't love them, you may want the money, but you don't. But that's actually never strong enough. So it'll get you so far, but it's not going to, there will come a time where the money won't be enough. So that's the key. And then to write like you would, like when you sit down to write your copy, really be in that energy and that space that you're writing to a friend. So you're writing a love letter, you're writing to a friend, and that will help quite a bit. And in terms of writing it. And I do have a couple of books. So part of the Love-Based Business series, I have two love-based copywriting books that can also help with that. And once you get to a point too, you don't have to necessarily write, all your own copy, by the way. So, I mean, that is something that, once you move forward, you can have, that's part of what we do is we really know how to master people's voices. I think starting out, yes, you do need to know, and everybody should know the basics of copy anyway, so that if the person giving you copy is giving you anything good or not. So I think everyone should have a basic understanding of it. But it doesn't have to be something that you always do. So that's something else to keep in mind, that this could be if you really don't like it, this can just be temporary.
And something you can outsource later on as your business grows.
Exactly. And then and the thing is that if you have pieces of copy that have worked out well, then that will give you, that'll be something that you can provide the copywriter, this is examples of what worked, my voice, that kind of thing. So that will be helpful too.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we've talked quite a lot about mindset, about mastering emotions, particularly negative emotions. Yeah. But what's the number one mindset tip you can pass on to our listeners about how they can get over feeling, when they've had a knockback maybe in business, right, or there's something hasn't worked for them? How can they pick themselves up and, carry on?
So don't pick yourself up too fast. I think that's what I would just like to invite, because that's what I did. I mean, that probably the biggest mistakes that I did was, when you get to this point, it's like, oh, I'll show them, and you get into this whole you feel like you need to get up too fast, and you don't. Well, I mean, you need to give yourselves time and space again to feel those feelings, because you're gonna, it doesn't matter. You may tell yourself that, you don't have to feel, that it's silly to feel grief. It's silly to feel whatever it is you're feeling. But the reality is emotions are emotions. They want to be felt. They are not logical. They are not rational. It is not up for discussion. Just feel them. That's all they want. So I would say, no matter how your brain is telling you, like, oh, you don't have to cry, this is stupid to cry about this. This is stupid to feel this bad about this. Everybody has failures. And, and the thing is a lot of people around you will also try to pick you up with stories. Like I know when was stumbling along the way with my fiction career, I used to have people, tell me, oh, so-and-so Lucille Bell was told she couldn't act. And, and those stories are great. And there's a time and a place for those stories, but not when you have to navigate those initial feelings. Because if you don't navigate those feelings, they don't go away. They just hang around and kind of sabotage your future actions. Because you're constant, and the reason how they sabotage it is you don't want to feel them. They're hanging around. You don't want to feel them, so then you're constantly doing stuff to not feel them. Whereas if you just feel them, have a good cry. I don't care how silly it is. You don't have to tell anyone. You don't have to just go into the bathroom. You don't have to tell anybody that this made you cry. Nobody has to know. Or made you, you had thrown a pillow, or, had to go stomp around or screamed or yelled or whatever it is. Let it go through you. Then you can get back up. And then all those stories about people overcoming and stuff is fine and great, and then you can put a plan together how you're going to recover. So that's what I would like to say.
That's excellent advice. So take your time, feel the emotions, and then with your own time, get up and start.
Right. Yeah. You definitely want to get up. I don't want you to not get up,
Yes.
but feel the emotions first, before you force yourself to start, taking action.
And how can our listeners find out more about you and your work?
So I have the Love Based Biz blog, and you can see this back here. So that's there's a free book on there, which is how to start a business you love and that loves you back. And even if you've already started a business, but it's for you. It's basically for anyone who has a business that they don't feel loves them back, or they don't love their business. And so that's free on the blog. Plus I have my own podcast, Love Based Money. And, and then of course there's the whole Love Based Business series that can help you as well, and go into all of this in more details, including like the Love Based Copywriting books and the Love Based Money and Mindset books, because mindset is a key component to all this.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing so much wonderful knowledge and wisdom with us. Really, really appreciate it. And for everyone who's been listening in, thank you so much for listening today. And hopefully I'll be seeing you again soon. Till next time. Bye-bye.